join. So if anybody, I don't know if you guys can see it, people who are trying to jump in, but I'll try to pay attention if I see somebody trying to jump in while I'm presenting. Um, so yes, welcome everybody. This is our renewable diesel working group. We try to do it about once a month. We're almost at 3 years now of doing this. We take a few months off in the summer because there's less attendance and we have a lot of other things going on. Also, our funding for clean cities, we haven't received any funding this year, first time in decades, I think. So this was funded in part by that small monetary amount we get from DOE. So we're also pulling back on that. We're trying to focus on things that we do have funding for and trying to stretch our dollars as long as we can. So I'm always happy when we have somebody like Krista who's willing to take over and give a different perspective on things. So yeah, I'm with Yellowstone-Teton Clean Cities. We're a nonprofit. We are a partner. We have a partnership with the Department of Energy's Vehicle Technologies Office. We promote alternative fuels for transportation. So it could be CNG, RNG, propane, electric vehicles, hydrogen, and renewable diesel is one that I've been spending a lot of time on for the last 3 years, ever since Montana Renewables started producing this in Great Falls. So I'm going to go through just some introductory slides about renewable diesel. Some people, it's their first time here, and it's always good to reinforce the basics of renewable diesel. And then Krista will talk. She's with Montana Renewables in Calumet and has part of their VP relations, or she's a VP of government relations and has some insights and will give us some updates on what they're doing there. Joining. And then we also have Matt from Neste on. I think there might be a question or two. I pulled a slide from one of their presentations that pertains to wastewater treatment, and so I might have to ask him. So again, I mentioned this last month. Most of these recordings, not all, but when I'm able to remember to record them, we have recently put them all up on YouTube, so you can go back and look. And I've tried to title them so you can maybe pick and choose the ones you want, but they're definitely not all labeled properly. But we do go into everything from kind of long introductions, a lot of the basics, to productions and some environmental impacts. We have pricing we've gone over a bunch of time, some of the maintenance considerations, cold weather, like you can see all the different things we've done. We've touched on sustainable aviation fuel a couple of times. And so a lot of different topics. And if anybody has a new one they want us to cover, just let me know. Another little announcement, we just revamped our website here. It's almost complete, but it's live and you can go check it out. And it's a little more easy to navigate and kind of see what we do. We need a little bit more Montana content on it. There's a little bit too much Wyoming for a 50-50 organization like ours. And then also draw attention to the donate location. If anybody has any companies or businesses you think that might want to participate or benefit from what we do, we encourage donations as government funding is kind of shrinking. So I'll get into some quick basics here of renewable diesel. Renewable diesel is not biodiesel. They're different fuels altogether. The only similarity is that they both are made from animal fats or vegetable oils. One of the cool things about renewable diesel is it's got a really high cetane, which is kind of an indicator of how well and thoroughly the fuel combusts. And there are cetane additives you can put in petroleum diesel, but renewable diesel starts off with a really high cetane number, which is pretty good. It's got great oxidative stability, so it lasts a lot longer in tanks and everywhere. So if you have it in a generator or something, renewable diesel could be a better option for you. Biodiesel, of course, probably has the best lubricity of these three fuels, so it does have some benefits like that where it excels. Production of renewable diesel in our region anyway occurs here in Great Falls in Montana. There's a plant in Dickinson, North Dakota, and there are two in Wyoming. So I think it was maybe last year I did the math, and I think our three-state area accounts for about 20% of the production in the country. That's probably changed a bit. This is one of my first slides from years ago when Montana Renewables started producing. I was just trying to illustrate that it's the same plant, sort of the same procedure. It's not a one-off system, and in fact, Calumet is the one that kind of fractioned off half of their plant production to allocate to renewable diesel. So a lot of renewable diesel plants have been modified from existing petroleum diesel plants. These numbers are probably not accurate anymore, but it was about 50-50 was the planned production volumes when they started producing in 2022. So I was hoping Krista could talk a little bit about wastewater issues, and I don't know a lot about wastewater, but the way I've been thinking about it historically, because I used to run a biodiesel company, and we also had wastewater production when you clean the feedstocks, the oils and stuff. So I tried to look a little bit into it. I'm not an expert by any means, but I found this little interesting white paper. It's only 2 pages, but it says that the renewable diesel refining includes two major processing steps. You have the pre-treatment unit and the hydrotreating or the production of the renewable diesel. And I think, and I could be wrong, but I think the majority of the wastewater production is in this pre-treatment step. And I think arguably that could be done anywhere. You could have it pre-treated at a pre-treatment plant anywhere in the country and have it shipped. But of course, I think the pre-treatment is designed to tailor those feedstocks specifically to your operation. So it takes out the things that might foul your catalysts most easily. So pre-treatment would differ from refinery to refinery. This is the Neste kind of flow chart I found. Again, it separates two water, in quotations, water steps. And the pre-treatment there is the second step there, the pre-treatment bleaching. And bleaching isn't like adding bleach. It can be adding soil, or it's not soil, but a solid material to which the oil impurities can adhere and bind. And then renewable diesel is also called hydrotreated vegetable oil. So that's another spot where water could be produced. On the right is not associated with the Neste's paper that I looked through, just some generic wastewater components you might find. And so you have your pH is something to consider when you're thinking about wastewater. Total suspended solids is another thing. You have your biological oxygen demand, which would cause eutrophication or allow organisms to grow in water, like when you see fertilizer runoff on golf courses. That's part of that. Well, that's actually the nutrient thing, but the oxygen is also needed there too. And then you have your ammonias, and you have some salts and phosphorus and nitrogen. But I guess my initial takeaway from all this is that wastewater doesn't have toxins like gasoline or things that you might think of as waste. It doesn't really have a lot of those in there. Of course, unless the feedstock, vegetable oil or animal fats had that in there, but that's not likely. So that's just general stuff. And then I found this company, Crown, that develops or sells pre-treatment systems. They're kind of smaller, and I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but you can see on that on the right here, there's dirty oil as it progressively gets cleaner through this refining process. And then, of course, here's that cake on the bottom where some of the bleaching occurs. So things bind to the silica and solid material. So that's all I have for like wastewater related stuff. And then I got maybe 5 more slides just for general knowledge of renewable diesel. So petroleum diesel is a mixture of many hydrocarbons, many linear branched hydrocarbons. There's also cyclic or aromatic hydrocarbons, as shown here. There's also some metals and sulfur in petroleum diesel. That's why we have ultra low sulfur diesel, because we have to take some of that sulfur out. But it's suffice it to say that it's a very complex mixture. This is definitely not everything that's in it. It just represents what's in there. And about 75% of petroleum diesel are these linear hydrocarbons. 25% are these cyclic and other metal-containing components. Renewable diesel, on the other hand, is a small subset of these linear hydrocarbons, and it could be as narrow as 4 carbon chain lengths. And that's the reason it's so clean. It doesn't have all these other pieces and other molecules in there to produce soot and all these other bad byproducts of combustion of petroleum. So you could almost say that renewable diesel is within petroleum diesel because it's a small subset of those molecules. And when you burn these molecules, you see on the left, the petroleum diesel is very dirty and gives off a lot of soot. You burn a bunch of molecules, you get a bunch more molecules, and you have a ton of stuff that's being emitted. Whereas renewable diesel, it's a very narrow bunch of molecules. You burn them, you get much fewer you get less soot and fewer emissions. Just some of the benefits because of this. Of course, with petroleum diesel, you have higher soot, as I just showed, and with renewable diesel, you have much less soot, so it's a lot cleaner while you're driving or working on these vehicles that are combusting and burning this fuel. And our emission systems these days on new diesels are very good and effective at reducing all this particulate matter. So new diesels, you wouldn't even see that soot coming out because they have good emission systems. But the reason they work is because they're binding all of the soot. And by doing that, they have a lot of issues where they clog, you have to regenerate them. It's one of the bigger headaches that fleet managers and shops will see. I think a huge percentage of the issues they have are related to the DPF and the emission systems. Diesel fuel filters, both in the tank and the vehicles, tend to last a lot longer because the fuel's a lot cleaner. And this is according to the Vancouver, Washington Fire Department. They say they see cleaner injectors, a lot more power, and less diesel exhaust fluid consumed. So I don't know that I ever say that that's going to happen for sure, but you can see that. And for this fleet anyway, they've seen 5 hours of reduced maintenance monthly per vehicle. So that's significant, especially for any fleet, but especially for a fire fleet. Another way to look at this from an emission standpoint is if you had a fleet of 90 buses, and this is the case for Idaho National Lab, they have 90 motor coaches that drive out to the desert every day. And so if you were just to run 1.5% renewable in all of these buses, that would be the equivalent in emissions reduction as replacing them or replacing one of them with an electric bus. They do have an electric bus too, but that's one way you can look at it. And in fact, so a couple of years ago, they were using 100% renewable in the summer and none in the winter. And so it equated to about 45% renewable overall. And by burning 45% renewable, that's the equivalent of replacing 30 of those buses with electric in terms of carbon emissions. So just a different way to look at one of the emissions things. So with that, I'll let Krista talk a little bit about some developments and updates from Montana Renewables. And then at the end, we can have some questions. So you can steal control.
All right. Oh, there we go. There you go. Can you guys see that?
Yep.
All right. Awesome. So I'm Krista Lee Evans. I'm VP of Government Relations for Montana Renewables. Thank you, Jesse, for reaching out and asking me to give a quick update. I'm going to talk a little bit about how Montana Renewables came about, where we are today, and some of our future plans with our DOE loan and our expansion. So Calumet, Montana Renewables is a separate company from Calumet. It is not a wholly owned subsidiary. There are outside investors in Montana Renewables. But Calumet, our number one value is safety. We always want to send people home in the same shape they arrived at work, taken very, very seriously at the refinery. And so I always want to touch base on that. All right, so let's talk about the refinery and what we do in the local community. We have about 300 jobs between both Montana Renewables and Calumet. And the University of Montana Business Economic Research Group, they did an analysis on our refinery and the impact regionally. And so they estimated that because of us, there were about 3,100 regional jobs in the area. Our payroll and benefits average about $140,000 annually. So it's a really good living wage job here in the Great Falls community. And in 2024, just in salaries, excluding benefits, there was $28 million. And so that investment and the acceleration of that throughout the community is a big deal. So from an operations perspective, Calumet bought the refinery in 2012, and they invested $1 billion. This is separate and distinct from the DOE loan funds. So $1 billion private dollars in Great Falls since 2012. And a majority of that was done around 2015 when they made a move to increase their diesel production. And that move to increase diesel production and the associated unit is what facilitated our ability to move into the renewable space somewhat easily. So right now today, Montana Renewables is permitted for 15,000 barrels a day, and CMR, Calumet Montana Refining, we call that the legacy side of the plant. They are permitted for 15,000 barrels per day. We're each operating at about 13,000 barrels, so we're not producing at our full nameplate capacity. But on the crude side of it, we also make a significant amount of asphalt. The crude side uses sour crude out of Canada, and it's a heavy crude, and it works very well for asphalt, including the polymer asphalt that we're known for. And the beauty of that is that it's longer lasting because of the polymer elements in it. So it's able to shift it like with really cold temperatures and really warm temperatures. So the replacement isn't as often. It's more expensive to put down, but it lasts longer. All right, so how does renewables fit? To Jesse's point, we were a 30,000 barrel a day crude refinery. And in 2022, they essentially split the plant in half. Half of it is traditional crude refining, and the other half is renewable fuels. And we'll get into what some of those renewable fuels are here in just a second. So let's talk about Montana Renewables and what it is and what is its value in Montana and the region and the country. So renewable fuels actually hits three primary segments. The environment, which of course we think about because of reduced life cycle greenhouse gas emissions, and ecosystem service preservation that it provides. But there's also two elements that I think are really important to talk about, and that is agriculture and the opportunities that renewable fuels provides for a larger segment of the agriculture landscape than, say, ethanol. I'm not dissing on ethanol, but we don't grow a lot of corn and soy in Montana. So renewable fuels is different and unique in that it uses agricultural products that we grow and produce in Montana as a feedstock. And then also national security. So the renewable fuel standard was initiated federally back in the day when we were concerned about reliance on outside fuel sources outside of the country. And the purpose of that was to increase our own fuel security and national security by being able to produce more fuels in the US. So that's where that came from. And I think that renewable fuels is continuing to meet that demand today. So how does this work? What do we do, right? So the flow chart or the way this works is the renewable feedstocks come in. All of our feedstocks come in by rail. Our refinery is interesting in that we have one pipeline that comes into the facility, and that is the crude pipeline for the legacy side of the refinery. All of our products either go out by rail or across the truck rack, okay? So renewable feedstocks come in via rail. We buy those. They're all market-based. And so it's financially driven. And that includes the CI scores, right? So tallow might be more expensive to get here, but the sale of that fuel is a higher benefit to us in the value stack. So there's a lot of moving pieces on that, and I'm not an expert. But anyway, so the way this works is renewable fuels come in via rail. Depending on time of year, especially with tallow cars, we need to heat those. That can take anywhere from 8 hours to close to 24 hours, if not more. We do that using steam that is a byproduct of the process. So they come in, we heat them up, and their very first stop is the pretreatment unit. And the pretreatment unit is essentially a giant washing machine. The one here at our facility is the first of its kind in the world. It's an interesting animal in that when they went from bench scale to full production, there was no in between. And so when we first started this unit in 2022, they told us we would need to use about 3,000 barrels per day of water. And through operations and improvements and understanding better how to use and manage that unit, we're now down to between 650 and 800 barrels per day. So we've significantly reduced the amount of water input, which of course follows on to the amount of wash water coming off. So you have the pretreatment unit. It's a giant washing machine, separates out things that the plants and animals took up. So if you think about it, like for plants, there's a lot of nitrogen, phosphorus, those types of elements that the crops took up out of the soil. And the wash water that comes off this pretreatment unit is similar to the wash water that comes off of facilities that make like canola oil and other veg oils for human consumption in the stores. So once the feed has been treated, it goes into the renewable fuel unit, and all the little chains are blown up in multiple ways. And we make renewable diesel, sustainable aviation fuel, and renewable naphtha. And then out of that renewable fuel unit, we also have off gases, right? The light end gases, and those are circled back around into the hydrogen unit. So a portion of our hydrogen is renewable hydrogen as well. One of the things that we have learned in comparison to traditional crude oil refining is that renewable fuels take a lot more hydrogen. And so what they're doing is they're pulling the oxygen molecules out. And so interestingly, we also make water at the refinery. So right now that is just discharged right back to the city's wastewater treatment plant. But we have plans in place on ways to reuse that inside the facility. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about feedstocks. We are not married to any individual type of feedstock. We can run multiple types at the same time. But when I first started, the oil and gas world talks in barrels and gallons, and I didn't even understand the words they were using. So I wanted to put the feedstock demand into terms and words that the agricultural community could understand and that they're used to. So under our current production volumes, if we were to use just canola for a feedstock, we would use all the oil from about 1.5 million acres of canola. In Montana, we only have about 200,000 acres of canola. But what that means is that we could consume all of the oil from everything produced in Montana. Okay, so the expansion that everybody's probably heard about, Montana Renewables obtained a $1.4 billion loan. It's not a grant, a loan from the Department of Energy to expand our SPK production, or synthetic paraffinic kerosene. And our plan is to have that fully in place by 2028. But what that means is that we have a lot more throughput. And so if we use just canola again, it would be over 3 million acres worth of canola oil that we would use. Now, remember, we use tallow, we use distillers corn oil, we use all those different bits. This is just an easy way to explain it to the agricultural community on what a big demand we are in state. So max SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, that's what we're calling our conversion into producing more synthetic paraffinic kerosene. And so anybody who isn't aware of this, the product that we make is the SPK, the kerosene. And then that is blended with traditional jet to make the sustainable aviation fuel. That's just the way it's set up. That's what FAA requires. And the blends are different, is my understanding. I'm not an expert on this. The blends are different depending on who the offtake contract is with. So talked a little bit about the DOE loan. Part of the concern with the expansion that I've heard in the local community is they are envisioning like 10 times the size of bits, of pieces of equipment in the refinery. And that's not necessarily the case. There will be some new bits that are planned, but so like today, we make 30 million gallons of SAF a year and 140 million gallons of renewable diesel. So what we're doing in our renewable fuel unit is we're working with the catalyst and those catalyst beds to make some changes so that ratio gets closer together. So not a new unit. It's more a shift of more refining to make more of the kerosene as it relates to renewable diesel. This is going to be a phased process, and Department of Energy is an interesting animal, and we work very closely with them, and they need to approve all of the engineering for the entire project before any of the individual pieces can go into play. So we don't have any field activities planned for 2025. Um, we're hoping in 2026 we have a basic turnaround planned in first quarter of 2026, and then hopefully we can start moving into some more of these expansion type projects. So the water treatment plant that we've talked about would be it would have to be finished by 2028 with the DOE funds. And the we've been asked, why didn't you build a water treatment plant to begin with? And the intent was always to treat the water. We just didn't have the capital to be able to do that. So with the DOE loan, we now have the capital, and that is part of this phase process that we have in play. So let's talk about the wash water. And I talked about it a little bit. I talked about the reduction in the amount that we are producing. Um, the big thing that I think I need to clarify for the folks in Montana is there's been a lot of concern about two injection wells that are in the process of being permitted in Pend Oreille County. We don't own those wells. Those are owned by a third party. We have never injected water into those wells. Those are existing Class 2 wells, and they have received about 200,000 barrels of oil and gas waste because they're permitted to receive that type of waste. In order to receive our wash water, we're not considered oil and gas waste because there's no petroleum, anything in that water at all. The well owner has applied to EPA to become a Class 5 injection well. So that's where that's at. Those permits have not been issued. We don't have a contractual relationship with the owner of those wells at this time to inject our water there. So currently, what are we doing with our water? So long-term goal is to create a pretreatment unit. So on the crude side of the refinery, we have a pretreatment unit that treats our water, and then it goes to the city POTW. What we are envisioning for the renewable side of the plant is something very similar. So the renewable side of the plant is an interesting animal because of the amount of nutrients in the water. Anybody who's paid attention to the nutrient standards and water quality requirements through DEQ and the narrative versus numeric nutrient standards and all of that, the nitrogen and the phosphorus are difficult and expensive for the city to remove. And so it's a unique animal in that way. And so we recognize that on the renewable side of the plant, we need to, and our environmental folks are starting to initiate these conversations. What does our water need to be treated to for the city to be able to accept it? Okay, so that's one option for this wash water. Another option is to treat it so that we can reuse it internally. We're looking at that as well. Another option is there's a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus in this water. That's something that agricultural producers spend a lot of money on for fertilizer. So we've been working with a couple of different companies that work in the agronomy sector on whether or not this water could be used for whether or not it could be used or land applied at appropriate agronomic rates. So we're working on that. Of course, if the salts are too high, there's problems with that. But so we're working on that alternative too, trying to identify whether or not that is feasible. So today, what are we doing with our wash water? Our wash water goes multiple places, all or out of state. But primarily, we're going into Idaho to big evaporation ponds. Okay, so that's the water. I've had questions about the sludge in the bottom, and that is currently going to the landfill. So that's what's going on with our water today. And I'll try to answer questions. I'm not a water quality expert, but that's the fishizzle on our water. And then the very last bit I wanted to touch on really quickly because we're getting quite a bit of pushback or questions about taxes. And folks might have heard about this. So Calumet Montana Refining, the crude oil side of the refinery, protested their property taxes for 22, 23, and 24. Montana Renewables has never protested their taxes. Okay, so that's separate and distinct. We did recently reach a settlement with the Department of Revenue. This table does not reflect those settlement numbers. We're still waiting on all of that to get organized between the Department of Revenue and the county. Hopefully that'll happen in the next week or two-ish. So yeah, and as far as it comes to when you appeal your taxes, you don't appeal the entire amount, or we didn't. We appealed the increase and paid in protest the increase. So, if you look at 2024, our full tax bill for Calumet, Montana refining was $6.6 million. And we protested 2.4 of that. So the 2.4 was held in escrow. We still paid it, but it was held in escrow pending the outcome of the litigation. So 25 and 26 are estimated. The property tax shifts that occurred in Senate Bill 542 and House Bill 231 this session were significant and impacted commercial entities like ours that are larger than $400,000 quite significantly. And so these are estimates, but we're waiting to see how everything's going to play out on that. So that's where we are on the tax side of the world. And I'm happy to answer any of your questions.
Thanks for that. I think I learned a couple things, which is always great. I would start with a question. There are no evaporation ponds closer than Idaho. There aren't really any in Montana.
There is not. I know that we've been approached by a couple of companies that are interested in doing something like that. And we've told all of them, if it's up to you, if you think you can make it pencil financially, and we have the right environmental attributes for it, it's a business decision for us, right?
And you said it's being trucked. Is it going down in trucks and tanker trucks?
No, so it's railed.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, are there any other questions from anybody?
Oh, there's one more thing I want to clarify for folks. So we've gone out publicly and said that we're going to treat our water, right? That we're working on that. It's interesting because the public is asserting that we're not doing that because we haven't applied for a discharge permit. Let me make this very clear. We will never apply for a discharge permit. We are not going to discharge into the Missouri River. If the water goes anywhere, it's going to go through the city's POTW. That's what we're envisioning. Once we reach an agreement on what our water needs to look like in order for them to be able to accept it.
Good to know. Because you are right on the river there.
Yeah.
It'd be pretty easy. I have a question generally, and we've discussed this in person, but the ability for us in Montana to get some of this fuel. So it typically leaves by rail, and so that kind of excludes us unless we can pull off a place to put a rail or have a terminal. But how is that looking for us off-takers in Montana to acquire some of this fuel?
So it's getting better. Okay. Baby steps, be patient with us, right? But we now have a blend tank for the sustainable aviation fuel. Okay, so that can now go across the truck rack. As you and I have discussed, interested in being able to run renewable diesel across the truck rack. That's a business decision, and whether or not we can get to the volumes or the volume demand to make that happen. So that's in the plans. That would be a goal. But we just need to have a better idea of what that demand would be, whether it be a blend rate, whether it be 100%. Part of the challenge, as you know, Jesse, is finding stores that have an extra tank for renewable diesel and all those different bits. But we are very interested in the renewable diesel availability, especially because our freeze point is so good as compared to others.
Yeah. So you guys also produce Jet A, don't you, there at Calumet side?
We
Yeah.
do.
So that's where you're blending the SAF and the Jet A.
Right.
And I guess sometimes it leaves by rail, or is that the majority of it
Yeah.
leaves by rail?
Yeah.
But you can load it onto trucks.
Correct.
So yeah, so I guess yeah, that's just a matter of working with the fuel distributor to say, go grab some SAF blended up and there.
Right. So the SAF is so when you sell renewable fuels, um, the value is it's a stacked value, right? So you have the actual value of the fuel, and then you have the environmental coupons, right? The different attributes, the environmental attributes. So one of the challenges historically of selling in Montana is there you don't get any of those environmental attributes associated with it. Whereas if you go into California, Washington, Oregon, British Columbia, those are available. But what has evolved and what we've worked very diligently at is a system called book and claim, where an entity, I'll just make somebody up, like somebody who has a lot of planes, like maybe UPS or FedEx, these, the companies that have the net zero goals and all of that. And what happens with book and claim is that those entities pay for the environmental attributes, and then the fuel is put into a plane in Great Falls. Because globally, you're reducing emissions still, and we don't, the actual SAF doesn't have to go into a specific plane's wing.
Yeah. Um, yeah, because I think as an example, Jackson Hole is very interested in SAF, and I haven't worked with SAF and or jet fuel in general. I know it's kind of a different method of delivery. The vehicles have to be specific for that fuel, and so I'm not as familiar. But they are very interested, and the volumes I was surprised are extreme, even in a small airport like Jackson. So I assume Bozeman and Missoula and all these locations could easily take truckloads at a time. That being said, do you know what the premium is? I know it fluctuates based
I
on
don't.
yeah.
I don't. And I was thinking about that. I should have gotten more details on that. I don't know what it is. But, I mean, there's international customers, right? That like the EU mandate, they've got to put SAF somewhere. And so it's a really good opportunity for Montana. And oh, and you were talking about volumes. In 2024, Montana Renewables was the largest producer of sustainable aviation fuel in North America. So
And
it was very exciting.
yeah, and I've had to stop saying that because now you aren't. Who took the lead?
P66,
Okay. And that's within the US where their refineries are.
yeah, it's actually North America, but yeah, P66 I think is in California. But with our expansion, once we up that production to 300 million gallons a year, we'll retake the lead.
Yeah, it's yeah, it's an ever growing industry and not everyone's jumping in quickly for the SAF. I mean, you have to be set up properly for that and but it is a great market. Are there any other questions? Well, I somehow am noticing I have a friend who just jumped on the meeting and messaged me, but I don't see him here. So I'm wondering if there's a lot more than 10 people on this meeting and somehow I just don't see them. Never had that happen before, but yeah. Anyway, thanks again, Krista. And thanks everybody for joining. If anybody has any suggestions for next time, let me know. And then I just remembered now I have a poll I was gonna share. I think I'm gonna launch it here. Let me see. Yeah. Oops, I already ended it. That doesn't work. I'm gonna try and share this poll. I've only done this a couple times, but sometimes we get some cool feedback. So I think I share with everybody. You can answer it. Just a few questions of your fleet or yourself if you use renewable diesel. And we are thinking of sending out some physical material stickers and stuff, maybe to put on your vehicle if you do run it. Do you guys see the
You're showing the poll results.
oh, I'm showing it. Huh. Yeah, I don't want to share it. I want to send the. Well, I'm gonna stop recording and I'm going to see where it is.